Hey guys, Joe here. We're moving on to part 2 of our emergency bag discussion. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll link it in the description below and put the little card up top. In part 1, we talked about the basics of emergency bags, how to approach them, how to plan them, the two main kinds of emergency bags most people are going to need, as well as the hierarchy of priorities when it comes to packing those bags. Now we're going to show a real world example, how it's done practically. Planning and knowing the theory is very important. It's a critical step. But if you can't execute that plan, it's just as bad as not planning at all. So we're going to go over my most important emergency bag loadout because it's the one I'm most likely going to use and thus most tested and most thought about. That's not to say this is the best bag in the world or that you should copy it. Certainly not. I'm not perfect. I'm no expert. It's just what works for me. Remember, the number one priority of any gear system, but especially an emergency bag, is it's very personal. This is what's most important involving my life, my location, my laws, my budget, and my skill set. You might need more gear, you might need less. You could live down the road from me and need a totally different kit. So keep that in mind. Now, the main priority beyond keeping it personal is to be goal specific with an emergency bag. And the reason why this one's so important is it's my winter severe storm bag. Here in New York, where I live, winter's a big deal, especially my area of New York. I operate out of upstate New York, specifically along the 104 corridor, going from Buffalo in western New York to Rochester in the Finger Lakes, and out in Syracuse in central New York. This 104 corridor is unique geographically. It is a very specific kind of divot where all these storms kind of funnel and run along there, especially in winter, and we get severe lake effect because we have Lake Erie to the west, and along the full stretch on to the north is Lake Ontario. In fact, this is the snowiest metro region, not just in New York, but the entire country, including Alaska. Syracuse is the snowiest city in the United States. Usually Buffalo and Rochester go back and forth for 2 and 3. Once in a while, a Midwest city or an Alaskan city will come in for number 3, but we really dominate for snowfall in a metro region. That's not to say this is the snowiest place in all the United States. It's just the most populated ones of those. So in rural areas, you might get way more snow than us, certainly, but you don't have the people, and the people is part of the problem. It's not just about snowfall and freezing cold. It's about how that affects behavior, how it affects congregation. When you have cities of 100, 200, 300,000 people all dealing with the same thing, all going to work, all trying to get home, all trying to deal with a severe winter storm, you get a high propensity of car accidents, people going off the road, pileups, severe traffic delays, and things like that. In fact, when the 2014 storm hit, the really big one known as Snowvember or codenamed Knife, that was a big deal. Just on the thruway alone, 150 people got stranded, and they were stuck there for 20 to 30 hours in freezing and below freezing temperatures. One area was hit with 7 feet of snow just from that one storm, and that snow persisted in that area for the following 8 months. Even snow removal crews couldn't handle it that day and had to back off until the storm was finished, let alone everyday people in a Toyota Corolla or Subaru or anything. So we have a lot to deal with snowfall and a lot of people on top of that. That's my unique situation. That's the goal I'm dealing with this bag. Now, I detail a little bit further in something I'm going to leave in the description for you guys. I actually put through the temperatures and snowfall amounts in the metrics and imperial for you guys, and you can go through and read a little bit more about the situation we're dealing with. And it's important that you look this over because it's not just going to show you some of the gear we're talking about today, but also the fact it involves my car kit. That goes beyond the tiered gear system. Home preparedness and vehicle preparedness is kind of the next step, and maybe one day we'll approach it. So I just need you to understand that this bag interacts very closely with my winter vehicle kit as well as the other tiers in the system. I'm going to have my tier 1. I'm going to be dressed for the appropriate weather. I'm going to have a wicking base layer, an insulating layer, and an outer layer that can handle wind, rain, and snow. I'm going to have my EDC, so my knives, my lighters, flashlights. I'm going to have potentially my off-body EDC and all that entailed. Maybe even a work bag or gym bag or school bag that has even more stuff on it, like extra water. So there's more to this than what we're talking about today. This is kind of just the end of our tiered system. So we still have all the other tiers and we have a vehicle kit. That's why it's important for me to include this list. And you can use this list however you want. Don't copy and paste it. You might need more or less, but use it as a guide. You can give it to friends and family. Just don't use it for commercial purposes. That's all I ask. A PDF form will be in the description. Now, starting with the emergency bag, we got to think about bag choice beyond it being goal specific. What are we going to need? Are we going to be sheltering in place in this kind of situation, or are we going to be trying to escape and evade? Well, with snowstorms, there is no escape and evasion, really. You're not going to flee New York when a huge snowstorm comes through. You're going to really try to hunker down, get all of your resources beforehand, and stay where you are. But due to my lifestyle and some of the things I need to do, I have to drive through snowstorms. Regularly, driving in zero visibility, I have to still go do what I need to do. And so for me, this is if I'm in that vehicle, in that snowstorm, and I get forced off the road, there's a car accident, and I have to sit in place for, like that 2014 storm we had, 20 to 30 hour situation. That's what I'm planning on here. So it's a shelter in place bag involving a vehicle collision or vehicle shelter in place scenario. And in that scenario, my prime shelter will be my vehicle, which is why it's so important to know I will be in the vehicle for this situation. But I still want a bag that can be mobile, and that's why I'm going to go with a hiking bag over a military tactical bag for my shelter in place kit, because I might have to leave that vehicle, because if I start smelling smoke or gasoline or oil, that's a big deal, because a car fire will immediately kill you. Car fires are one of the most toxic things you can breathe in, and obviously they burn very well, so you're just going to be sitting in a giant oven. So I need to be able to flee the car in a heavy wet snow environment. During that 2014 storm, the biggest one we've had in a long time, most of the people that died from that storm died from exhaustion and exertion. We want to have our bag be as functional as possible, but as lightweight as possible. And that's where hiking bags come in. We don't want a tactical bag. Really want to harp on that. So I go with my Kelty Red Wing 50. This is heavy duty enough to carry the weights I need it to carry, but it's not as heavy as a tactical bag. It has a lot of features that are really nice. Fully adjustable shoulder straps up at the shoulder, at the chest strap, and where it connects to the bag. Also have really nice padded hip straps that are adjustable, removable. We have a metal frame insert here that helps with rigidity and support. It doesn't have MOLLE on the outside, so it reduces its snagging risk. There's like grab handles and daisy chain, but it's not as bad as a normal tactical bag if we're going to go through the woods or something like that. We want to cut down on all that stuff. So this is kind of a good overall thing. It has the pros of a tactical bag, but also the pros of an ultralighter kind of mixed together. It's a good kind of even ground thing. Kelty's really good at making their hiking style bags. And it's 50 liters because we want to make sure we're having enough gear with us for a winter scenario. When it's summer, we don't need to worry about as much. We can go a long time without food. We don't even necessarily need shelter. In winter, there's a lot we need to fabricate because we don't want to waste the calories, the energy to go do that. And we don't want to be exposed to the elements more than we need to due to wind chill creating frostbite, due to the temperature in general leading to things like hypothermia. There's a lot of dangers in a winter environment here that we don't have the rest of the year. And unfortunately, winter here is half the year. We get snowfall and cold temperatures from the end of October into April, which is why this is such an important kit for me. Now, going with our hierarchy of priorities, that first thing was first aid. And even though exposure is such a big risk in winter, first aid is still our number one priority because we can bleed out or choke to death or have issues in a matter of seconds to minutes. So we still want to start off with what I call a comprehensive first aid kit or a trauma kit. We want to avoid IFAKs because there might be other people with us. The key part of an IFAK is the I, individual. It's meant for one person. So if you need to use it on someone else, now you don't have things for yourself if you need it. Or if you have multiple kids or a wife and kids, you need to have something that can do a little bit more than just one person. Now, if there's multiple people in your family, each one should have their own emergency bag with their own emergency kit, but we can't always get the family on board. We can't always get our friends on board. So we need to compensate a little bit extra. Go beyond the IFAK. We will do a special video on what people usually get wrong with first aid. But for this, just know we need to be able to treat breathing issues. We need to be able to treat burns and cuts, major hemorrhages, as well as minor cuts and bruises, especially if we have kids that will make them freak out. Morale and being able to stay focused is just as important as other things, because if you're not focused, you got a kid screaming, that could lead to other disasters because you're not paying attention and you mess up. So first aid goes beyond the big ones, but we need to prepare especially for those big ones, especially if there's potentially a car wreck. So first aid, very important. Have a fully kitted out trauma kit or comprehensive first aid kit. Avoid the micro kits. Avoid IFAKs in this scenario. This isn't quite first aid, but it's related because it can lead to sepsis and infection, which will become a first aid issue, and that's a hygiene kit. This is just a basic thing. It's in a cheap Rothko pouch, and I got a Zippo bag inside it to keep it nice and tight. We've got toilet paper, we've got paper towel, we got a trash bag, hand sanitizer, Kleenex, wet wipes, all there to keep us clean, make sure we're not, infecting our face, cuts, stuff like that, with the doo-doo and other things we might be doing when we go to do our business. Yes, it's our own bacteria, our own viruses, but things in the digestive tract are meant to stay in the digestive tract. That's why you don't want to drink your own urine in a survival situation, because that's meant to be in your urine tract, not your digestive tract. You can get very sick when you mix up the bacteria and virus loads into different parts of your body. So we want to keep as clean as possible, even if it's just us, because we can still get ourselves sick off of our own pathogens. So do keep that in mind. Hygiene, very important, should be linked in with your first aid kit. Going on that, what else can kill us? Well, the next most important thing is very obviously going to be exposure, especially in a winter type scenario. And that's where the car comes in. That's our primary shelter. But what if we have to leave that? We have to be able to fabricate our own shelter, and that's very hard to do in winter. Exposure is very important due to hypothermia and frostbite. So the most important thing is going to be my sleep system. It's way too big to put in front of here. It's off camera. It's in a 30-liter bin because this is the off season, so I'm storing it so it doesn't lose its loft. But it's a military modular sleep system, the famous MSS. These are very expensive and hard to find nowadays. You almost might be better off getting a civilian equivalent, but essentially this bag can go down to -30 Fahrenheit very easily, so to speak, which is beyond the coldest temperature on record in my region. This alone is good enough to keep me safe without a fire, to keep me warm, even without major clothing. So just the sleep system is good enough. I keep it in the bin in my car, and then I pack it up and throw it onto my bag as I need to. I don't want to keep this compressed and on my bag all winter, because it can lose its loft and over time be less insulating. In fact, as soon as you wash it, it loses up to 20% of its insulation. So that is something that's very important. Keep your gear loaded out if you have a big enough car to do that. I have a Subaru, so it's got a huge hatchback. I have room to keep it in here. And on top of that, I have other things that can go around it to make it do even more. So I have a sleeping pad that can go with my MSS. It's a Climate Static V insulated one. You want a sleeping pad that has an R value rated for winter, which is 4 or higher. And the colder it gets, the higher the R value you need. This is the insulated value. R values aren't necessarily standard internationally, but in general, a 4 will be good for most winter. It's a 4 season-ish, though you probably will sweat too much in the summer. Once you get up to Arctic temperatures, you need like a 6. But for my area, this being a 4.4, more than good enough, and it will go with my sleep system. It can fit right inside the Gore-Tex bivy of the MSS. To cut down on wind in case I need to operate outside of my sleeping bag in a wind chill scenario where I could get frostbite, I also keep a cheap kind of hammock tarp. This is a Kalinko, which is kind of the OEM version of a DD hammock tarp. We can't really get DD hammock tarps as easily here in the United States, so I went with the generic version. It's coming out of the same factory, I believe. So it just has a different brand name, but it's basically the same thing, and this can help as a windbreak. And on top of that, I also have a grabber survival blanket type thing. You want these more heavy duty ones, even if they're not great. They're way better than a Mylar blanket, which will just gonna be completely useless in a windy winter situation. But you need to know how to use these. You can't just wrap yourself up in them and lay on the ground, especially with those survival bivvies as well. It can kill you. It can increase your risk of hypothermia. These are not to protect you from cold air. They are not to insulate you from the ground. What they're meant to do is reflect your own radiant body heat or the heat from a fire. You don't want them touching your skin. You don't want to be close to these things. You want air between you and the Mylar, or especially air in a survival blanket like this, so that you're not touching it, because they can build up condensation, which pulls the heat from your body and makes you more prone. So don't use these as like a blanket. Keep airspace between you and this. This is not meant for a ground sheet. This is meant to line the tarp and reflect maybe fire from a heat. Moving off of that, I have other things to deal with exposure on my body. I will pull this out of the bag and keep it on me. This is a Dickinson Trading Post pouch that I set up as a personal first aid kit. I've got a big brand new ferro rod in here, a striker that can also work for bow drill and quartz or flint striking. Inside it, I have an Altoids tin with material to make char cloth. I've got a stick of fat wood. I've got some jute cord for fire starter or tinder, and some other things is there as well, like stormproof matches and a lighter. So that'll go into my own personal pockets of what I'm wearing. And then on top of that, I have a fire kit extra for my bag. So that way I have extra fire kits. I want to make sure that if I need a fire, I can build one in a winter environment. Granted, my shelter's very good. My MSS can handle everything I need to deal with. But if there's other people with me, I need to be able to start a fire. So we got a lot in here. We also have a stove and cook kit in here that also helps with exposure. Yes, they do kind of help with the water and food element, but it's more for exposure because drinking a warm liquid will keep your core warm. And in a hypothermia situation, a warm core is the priority, not your hands and feet. If you warm your hands and feet during hypothermia, you risk a heart attack. We want to warm the core first, warm it slowly, and then move out to the extremities once the core is stabilized. So cook kit, fire kit, and personal fire kit all go into handling exposure as well. And because it's winter, we got even more for exposure. To help with the tarp, I've got these hiking sticks. They can help stabilize me when I'm going through the snow, but they can also help with setting up the tarp. In terms of gathering wood and stuff, we can go into cutting tools. This year, I'm experimenting with a hatchet. This is the Flying Fox by Council Tool, American made, under $100, very good value. I did some custom coloring and treatment of the sheath. I've also put jute twine here. It acts as an emergency tinder, but also a good grip surface even when wet. It's not for overstrike protection. You're not going to really overstrike with a hatchet. So this is purely for grip, for fine carving. You're going to want to prioritize a hatchet in this situation. You don't want a big chopping knife. Use your knife as a knife. Do something that can actually process wood. You don't want to be screwing around in the winter, especially if you're not going to have a good shelter like I do. You're going to be processing a lot of wood, so you want something dedicated to it. Don't use a big chopper. Now, if you're someone who is kind of newer to outdoors and stuff, and you're not as familiar as how to use a hatchet in specialized ways, I recommend a Boyz Axe. Now, this one is a shelf piece. This is more for historical value, and I'm going to do some customization to it and use it as decoration, just because it's super important. But this is an FSS style Boyz Axe from Council Tool. A Boyz Axe is a great tool to go with if you're not as comfortable with a hatchet. So a Boyz Axe is going to be longer. This is a 28-inch handle. This is a heavier head. This is 2.25 pounds, whereas the hatchet is 1.63. So this is a good generalist axe. This is small enough to put in a pack or on the outside of the pack really, but not so small as to be, really struggling or needing special skill for felling or for bucking. You can do everything with this, even if you have basic woodsman skills. You should always be training, always getting better, but if you want an extra handicap, go with a Boyz Axe, not a hatchet, and definitely not a chopper. You can see this also has jute as well. Again, emergency tinder, and for grip for fine carving. It's still light enough for me to carve with a Boyz Axe. This is the best generalist axe you can go with. It's long enough to fell, long enough to buck safely without potentially going to your shins, but still light enough to do all the fine micro carving tasks. Now that said, I still do have large knives in here. Something like an SE4, like this guy here, is a great example. I've had this for a couple of years. Yes, the coating is still intact because I take care of my knives, but I've really liked it. It can process wood if you need to, but it is a good overall knife. The one thing I would say to be careful of is you do have exposed metal here on the back, and that can increase frostbite on your hands. So you want to be using gloves if you're going to use a knife like this. Whereas the next knife, you don't need gloves as much, and that's something like a Mora. So this is an old Mora. You can't get it anymore. I'll try the link to it if I can, or the alternative. But this has a fully rubberized grip. I'm not going to get hypothermia or really frostbite on my hands from handling this because there's no exposed metal. So it's just hand on plastic. You still want to wear gloves when you can, but the great part about this model, it's got kind of a skin texture, so it really locks in your hand, even if your hands are wet. So say if your gloves got wet and you need to take them off, something like a Mora is a great option. These are way cheaper than these. These you can get for like 20 bucks and stuff like that. Moras are probably the best value knife for the outdoors that you can go with. Beyond that, it's kind of some extra stuff to kind of help with exposure. We got hot hands, we got extra pair of gloves, extra hat, extra socks, extra thing to wipe sweat off because we don't want to big building up perspiration. Again, much like with that safety shelter, it can pull heat from our body and increase our risk of hypothermia. To kind of help protect my gloves, if I'm going to do woodsman tasks, I have another pair of leather gloves, as well as this Kevlar hank we're trying out this year to help preserve the life of my winter gloves. If I'm going to be handling anything hot or sharp, I'll use one of these or both to preserve my winter gloves. I'll have a pair on me, plus that extra pair, then these on top of it. It may seem excessive, but we don't know how long we're going to be out there. Those people were stuck out for as long as 30 hours in the 2014 storm, but what if I'm in a rural area? It could be even longer than that. I really want to make sure I'm taking care of my body. To go along with that stuff, an optional item is something like a saw. You can do everything with a hatchet or an axe, but a saw can make some nicer clean cuts if you want to do specific stuff, especially if you're going to do something like a tarp tent or something like a teepee type tent set up with your tarp. You don't want it to kind of rip through, so good clean lines are the way to go, not super jagged lines like you might get with a hatchet or axe. And then lastly, for kind of exposure care is this. This isn't so much exposure care for me. This is just a cheap garbage bag. It's exposure for my gear. I don't want my gear to get wet and frozen. So I will put this around my bag if it's being set under my shelter to keep it from getting moist from melting snow, from a heat of a fire, or anything like that. So exposure for your gear is also important, not just exposure to your body. And because it's winter scenario, again, we're thinking about not just hypothermia, but also frostbite and having to deal with heavy, wet snow and its impact on our cardiac health. Even someone young like me can have a cardiac event, especially when you're like me, drinking energy drinks and coffee on a regular basis. My generation specifically is dealing with a problem of arterial hardening because all the crap we put into our body. We need to be healthier. I need to be healthier. So, yeah. Now, moving off of exposure care, what are some other things we need to care about? Obviously, water in winter. A lot of people get this wrong. They want to boil down and melt snow. Avoid that. Snow is only 10% water. We want to melt ice. So because of that, I'm bringing a full gallon of water. It's well worth its weight in my pack. Yes, this will freeze. To keep this from bursting, we're going to pour out 10 to 15%. That's about the rate of expansion of ice. And melting ice is much better because it's 90% water. I'd rather melt this down than be sitting outside 24/7 nonstop melting snow, which is what you'll need to do to get enough water to be properly hydrated in a survival situation. I don't think people quite understand how much water you need and how hard it is to get that purely from melting snow. Now, to go along with this, I do have a water filter, but you can see it's kind of a cheap filter. This is the Life Straw. I don't have anything special in here like a Grail because this is a last resort. In a freezing temperature scenario, you're going to get one use out of it, and it's going to freeze, and then it's going to be useless because the ice expansion will destroy the filter. It doesn't matter how good the filter is, it can't handle being frozen. So this is a one-use emergency scenario, and I'm going to be drinking directly out of a tainted water source. Another reason to avoid that in a winter scenario is it's going to lower your core body temperature because that source is probably going to be cold. If you boiled it, why are you using a filter? So this is very much a last resort item, but it's still in there. The last thing I want is to go to hypothermia and have a stomach bug on top of that. So very much a last resort item. Next on our priorities is going to be food. Food is really important in winter and not so much in summer because we need to care about calories. We're going to be expending calories just to stay warm. We're going to be expending calories to do work like setting up our shelter, especially in heavy, wet snow. And it's just something that is going to be very hard for us to obtain, even if we know about hunting and wild edibles in a winter snowstorm environment. You might not be able to get outside if it's something that's really cold and really windy and you could get frostbite within 5 minutes. You're not going to be going out and hunting or fishing. So what I choose to do is peanut butter. It's very high in calories, high in fat, which is the first thing you burn. Then you burn protein. This has some protein. And it also has sugar in it, which can give us a quick energy. Another thing I have in my fire and cook kit is things like liquid IV to replace my electrolytes. That's part of hydration, but also food. We need our electrolytes to keep going, not just fat and high calories. Another thing I have in there is hot cocoa for more sugar, for morale boosting. So food and hydration can really do double duty. It's not just calories, not just electrolytes. It can make you happy and really help you get through the scenario. Choose something that you're going to like to eat, like to drink. Don't just go with lifeboat rations because they're high calorie and last long, because eating them is like being in a really terrible situation. It's reminding you, hey, this is survival food. I'm in a survival situation. It's really going to bum you out, especially since a lot of survival bars taste like crap. Going off of that, the next thing is going to be mobility. How are we going to move all this stuff around, especially if we're going to go across ice? I'm about 210, 220 sometimes. Carrying another 40 pounds on top of me is a lot of risk to go across ice. I can easily fall in. And going through heavy snow, high risk cardiac. What I've done to overcome that, if I can get it in here, is I got this guy. And this is going to be tested out this year in a bunch of scenarios. This is a Jet Sled Junior. If you're a hunter or fisherman, you might know about it. It's just big enough to handle my gear and some extra stuff for my car kit and help me haul it across the top of the snow so all my weight isn't in one spot. I'm just dealing with my body weight and maybe a couple extra things I want to keep on my person, but the bulk of my gear will be in the sled towed behind me to help reduce my weight, help keep it not concentrated if I have to go across ice. So this is a good tool I think is going to do well. And also I have an extra hank of rope. I've replaced the rope with like 50 to 100 feet of dock rope. This is going to be able to handle wet environments. And if I need to go across a lake and I don't want to bring my gear with me, I just need to go grab something for whatever reason, I can tie myself off to the shoreline with this, and it's good enough to hold my body weight to pull myself back in. Or even if it's not a breakthrough scenario, I want to reduce the risk, I can tow this 10, 20 feet behind me and still be able to distribute my weight and not break through. And it's just a very good idea, something I'm trying out because I have enough room in my vehicle to do that. You might not. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now that we've kind of gotten through the major ones, we could bleed out in seconds to minutes, have health issues. We can go to hypothermia and have frostbite damage in a matter of minutes to hours. We can have issue dehydration in days. Calorie input is very important for all those other things, as well as keeping us alive in a winter environment, and mobility helps wrap everything together. We have some extra stuff in here. So one of the things that kind of can help with exposure is a thermometer. And this is important because of wind chill and how that influences frostbite. If it's 15 degrees or lower out Fahrenheit, you can be prone to frostbite depending on wind speed. And so it's important to know what the temperature is outside. So just sticking this outside my shelter, it can help me understand, hey, is it safe to go outside for a long time? If it's really windy and it's below 15 degrees, probably not going to do that. So just an extra tool. You can get very expensive weather monitoring tools. I believe there's one called Kestrel that makes one of the 5,000 or 5,500, but it's like $300. Something like this, $20, much better. Moving on from that, I have a towel because, hey, never travel without a towel and it's secured away. This is for wiping sweat and things like that. Might need to dry stuff off. I have a buff. I do have a wool buff. It's just not over here, so I'm using this as an example for face covering to keep my skin from being exposed as much as possible. That also includes eye care, not just snow blindness, but getting cold wind into your eyes and freezing your eyelids. It sucks. You can get goggle style protective glasses or just standard protective sunglasses. Either of those will work, and I use both depending on the situation. For illumination at night, I have this kind of Lucy light style thing. It's a solar battery charger that also has multiple colored lights, including red light for preserving night vision and signaling, hey, emergency. I've got bright orange paracord to mark things off so I don't accidentally go there or trip over something. Something that is going to be attached to my bag is an emergency whistle. This is very important. You're not going to be screaming for help. It can really destroy your voice, especially in a winter scenario. You're going to just completely tear up your lungs. You can even die from that. If it's cold enough out, you will literally just burst your lungs from the inside by screaming and heavy breathing in cold air. So having an emergency whistle, specifically something loud like a storm whistle, very important. You want it to be P-less like this is, because that P can freeze in there and the whistle can stop working. We have a weather radio for obvious reasons. And then lastly, we have a contractor bag because it's a contractor bag. We can fill this with snow to use it for padding or to drag snow along with the sled here and help build a snow fort. Snow is a really good insulator, again, being predominantly air, not water. So that can help us build up a shelter as well. Say we lose our MSS, we lose everything else, we can still build a snow-style fort that's kind of good enough to keep us alive until help arrives or until the storm breaks. And that's pretty much everything. There's a lot here, and I could go even more in depth, but this would be an hour-long video. We got to go through these steps. We got to make sure we're packing up our gear and then testing our gear, and that's what I've done here. Hopefully this helps a little bit along with that list I'm going to provide. We've got a lot we have to think about. We have to keep things personal. We have to be goal-oriented. We have got to choose our bag. We got to do that priority of healthcare or first aid, of going with exposure, with going with water, with food, mobility. And then we got to think about the small stuff. Things like a weather radio are important. It's not going to change the situation you're in, but it can help give you hope. Things like a temperature monitor, not necessary, but can help you understand your wind chill effect a little bit more. Things like leather gloves preserve our snow gloves. You might not think about that, but it can really do a lot if you've got to be out for a long time. So with that said, guys, we're going to wrap up the emergency bag section, wrap up the tiered gear system. We will do another video kind of as a bonus going through the mistakes people make with trauma care and first aid kits, just kind of to elaborate on that further, because there is a lot that goes into that kit that I just can't show off in this video. And I want to leave you guys with the understanding that there's a lot of bad information out there, a lot of bad individuals out there in the gear, preparedness, and emergency space. They see you as a dollar sign. They see you as someone that they can market books and survival schools and sponsored products to. they aren't looking out for you. They're looking out for themselves. The person that's going to care most about you is you and your loved ones. Even someone like me, I don't know you. I don't know all the specific things in your life. I care about my audience, every single one, even the people that don't like me. But I can't know enough about you to really help you out in the best way possible. So you really need to sit down and think, especially with emergency bags. Keep it personal. Keep it personal. Keep it personal. Don't just copy what I do. Don't copy what anyone else does. Really think about the nitty-gritty details, and hopefully you'll never need any of this stuff. You'll only need, your clothing, your EDC, and that's it. That would be the ideal world, but unfortunately emergencies, natural and man-made, are happening more and more frequently, especially in the United States and over in Europe, the bulk of my audience. So we need to be prepared. It's now time to get ready. For some things, it's almost too late. So you got to start now. You got to start building up a gear system. You got to get an emergency bag set up for the things that are going to be most relevant to your life. So until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you guys then. Toodles.